Thank you, Leanne. I'm going to read mostly from my last book, Metaphysical Dog, and with a couple of poems from the collected poems coming out next year. Two of the poems I'll read refer to other narratives. And this is always difficult because I try to recapitulate what happens in the other narratives. There's a certain amount of just summary that happens in the poem. The first poem I'll read refers to a movie called Pandora and the Flying Dutchman with Ava Gardner. It's not a very good movie. Sometimes works of art that really aren't very good catch one. Something about the situation or plot or performance, you come to feel implicated in what happens in the film. I suddenly realized, should I? Let's move this. Yeah, I think that I'm still going to be able to read the page. Yeah, it's fine. Anyway, this is an instance of that. As I say, it's a rather arty film. It's got designs by Man Ray. It's rather lugubrious, but as I said, I felt implicated. He is Ava Gardner. He is Ava Gardner at the height of her beauty in Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. I had allowed him to become, for me, necessity. I was not ever for him necessity. An adornment, yes, a graceful, not necessity. Everyone, the men at least, are crazy about Pandora. She's smart, self-deprecating, funny. She who has seen seemingly everything about love and says she has no idea what love is. Who knows the world finds her beautiful, so that she must test every man and slightly disgusted find him wanting. Clearly, she is not in this crowd of men eager to please her, to flatter and bring her drinks, found someone who is for her necessity. Watching Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, you feel sympathy for the beautiful, who cannot find anyone who is for them necessity. He is Ava Gardner at the height of her beauty. Fucked up. You knew you'd never fall for someone not fucked up. Watch her test each suitor. She sings about love to an old friend, drunk, a poet. He asks her to marry him. After she again refuses, you see him slip something into his drink. Then he dies, poisoned. She says he has tried that too many times, now she feels nothing. Promising nothing, she asks the famous race car driver, who also wants to marry her, to shove the car he's worked on for months over the cliff into the sea. He does. In the first flush of pleasure, she agrees to marry him. The next day, he has the car's carcass, pouring water, dragged up from the sea. You are the learned, amused professor, surrounded by his collections, who carefully pieces together fragments of Greek pots. You know, it is foolish to become another suitor. Hors de combat, soon you're the only one she trusts. You become at moments her confessor. Then she meets the Dutchman. He offers little, asks nothing, When she withdraws her attention, he isn't spooked. Because when she meets him, he is painting the portrait of someone who has her face. The petulance she scrapes off the face. He charmingly makes her head a blank ovoid and says, "That's better." She thinks that she is the knife that cutting him will heal him. You know, she's right. You've discovered he is the fabled Dutchman who for centuries has sailed the world's seas unable to die. Unable to die, though he wants to die. You know what it is to want to die. His reasons are a little contrived, a mechanism of the plot. Reasons that Pandora, at the end, discovers he murdered centuries earlier through jealousy and paranoia his wife. Now, unless he can find a woman willing to die out of love for him, sail out with him and drown, he cannot ever find rest. This logic makes sense to her. She who does not believe in love will perform an act proving its existence. She wants, of course, to die, to throw her life away. The Dutchman will always arrive because that's what she wants. Those of us who look on, who want the proximate and partial to continue, loathe the hunger for the absolute. All your life you have watched as two creatures think they have found in each other necessity. Watched as the shell then closes for a time around them. You envy them as you gather with the rest of the village, staring out to sea. When she swims out to his boat to give herself, both succeed at last in drowning. Couples stay together when each of the two remains a necessity for the other, which you cannot know until they cease to be. Tautology that is the sum of what you know. He is the master. He has lived by becoming the master of the alchemy that makes, as you stare into some one person's eyes, makes you adore him. Eyes that say that despite the enormous landscapes that divide you, you are brothers. He too is trapped in all that divides soul from soul. Then suddenly he is fluttering his finger ends between yours. He rises from the table, explains he had no sleep last night, and leaves. You couldn't worm your way into becoming for him necessity. When did he grow bored with seduction and confessors and find the Dutchman? For months, there's been nothing but silence. When you sent him a pot only you could have with care pieced together from the catastrophe of history, more silence. The enterprise is abandoned. Something there is in me that makes me think, I need this thing. This that gives this thing the illusion of necessity. As enthralled to flesh as I, he could not see beneath this old face I now wear, this ruinous, ugly body, that I am the Dutchman. But nobody knows when living where necessity lies. Maybe later, if history is lucky, the urn will not refuse to be pieced together. This is neither good nor bad. It is what is. Name the bed. Half light, just after dawn. As you turn back in the doorway, you to whom the ordinary, sensuous world seldom speaks, expected to see in the thrown-off, rumpled bedclothes nothing. Screams stretched across it. Someone wanted more from that bed than was found there. Name the bed that's not true of. Bed where your twin died. Eraser bed. I'm going to read a long poem based on, about writing a poem in my second book called Ellen West. The poem Ellen West is based on a case history by a man named Ludwig Binswanger. It's a great essay. After a long, long time, I wrote a poem about writing the poem. Writing Ellen West was exorcism. Exorcism of that thing within Frank that wanted, after his mother's death, to die. Exorcism of that thing within Frank that wanted, after his mother's death, to die. Inside him was that thing that he must expel from him to live. He read the case of Ellen West as a senior in college and immediately wanted to write a poem about it, but couldn't. So he stored it, as he has stored so much that awaits existence. Unlike Ellen, he was never anorexic, but like Ellen, he was obsessed with eating and the arbitrariness of gender and having to have a body. Ellen lived out the war between the mind and the body, lived out in her body each stage of the war, its journey and progress, which compromise, reconciliation is attempted, then rejected, then mourned, till she reaches at last in an ecstasy costing not less than everything, death. He was grateful he was not impelled to live out the war in his body. Hiding in compromise, well wadded with art he adored, and with stupidity and distraction. The particularity inherent in almost all narrative, though contingent and exhausting, tells the story of the encounter with particularity that flesh, as flesh, must make. Ellen West was written in the year after his mother's death. By the time she died, he had so thoroughly betrayed the ground of intimacy on which his life was founded, he had no right to live. No use for him to tell himself that he shouldn't feel this because he felt this. He didn't think this, but he thought this. After she died, his body wanted to die. But his brain, his cunning, didn't. He likes narratives with plots that feel as if no one willed them. His mother, in her last year, revealed that she wanted him to move back to Bakersfield and teach at Bakersfield College and live down the block. He thought his mother, without knowing that this is what she wanted him to die. All he had told her in words and more than words for years was that her possessiveness and terror at his independence were wrong, wrong, wrong. He was the only person she wanted to be with, but he refused to live down the block. And then she died. It must be lifted from the mind, must be lifted and placed elsewhere, must not remain in the mind alone. Out of the 1,000 myriad voices, 1,000 myriad stories in each human head, when his mother died, there was Ellen West. This is the body that you can draw out of you to expel from you the desire to die. Give it a voice. Give each scene of her life a particularity and necessity that in Binswanger's recital are absent. Enter her skin so that you can then make her other and expel her. Survive her. Animal mind, eating the ground of Western thought, the mind-body problem. She who in the last months of her life abandoned writing poems in disgust at the failure of her poems is a poem. She in death is incarnated on a journey whose voice is the voice of her journey. Arrogance of Plutarch, of Shakespeare and Berlioz, who thought they made what Cleopatra herself could not make. Arrogance of the maker. Verdi killed himself, and then young men all over Europe imitated him and killed themselves. But his author, Goethe, cunning master of praxis, lived. Frank thought when anything is made, it is made not by its likeness, not by its twin or mirror, but its opposite. Ellen, in his poem, asks, without a body, who can know himself at all? In your pajamas, you move down the stairs just to the point where the adults couldn't yet see you. To hear more clearly the din, the sweet cacophony of adults partying. Phonograph voices among them. Phonograph voices, their magpie beauty. Sweet din, magpie beauty. One more poem, one more book, in which you figure out how to make something out of not knowing enough. Mouth. It was as if, starving, his stomach rebelled at food. As quickly as he ate, it passed right through him. His body refused what his body needed. Recipe for death. But he said, what others think is food isn't food. It passed right through him. He shoved meat into his mouth, but still his body retained nothing, absorbed nothing. He grows thinner. He thinks he cannot live on nothing. He has a persistent sense that whatever object he seeks is not what he seeks. Now he repeats the litany of his choices. Love, which always to his surprise exhilarated even as it tormented and absorbed him. Unendingly under everything, art. Trying to make a work of art he can continue to inhabit. The choices he said he made almost without choosing. The best times, I must confess, are when one cannot help himself. As his pride at his intricate inventions come to nothing. Nothing he can now name or touch is food. Sex, was the bed, where you learned to be naked and not naked at the same time. Bed, where you learned to move the unsustainable weight inside, then too often lost the key to it. Faces too close that despite themselves promise, then out of panic, disappoint. Not just out of panic. Only in his mind does he freely both hear and not hear. The imperious or imagined needs of those you love or think you love demand you forget that when you smell your flesh, you smell unfulfillment. We are creatures, he thinks, caught in an obscure, ruthless economy. His hunger grows as whatever his mouth fastens upon fails to feed him. Recipe for death. But he's sure he'll learn something once he sees La Notte again. He's placed Duino elegies next to his bed. He craves the cold catechism Joyce mastered, writing Ithaca. Now he twists within the box. He cannot exit or rise above. He thinks he must die when what will not allow him to retain food makes him see his body has disappeared. Elegy for Earth. Because Earth's inmates travel in flesh and hide from flesh and adore flesh, you hunger for flesh that does not die, but hunger for the absolute breeds hatred of the absolute. Those who are the vessels of revelation, or who think that they are, ravage us with a promise of rescue. My mother outside in the air, waving, shriveled, as if she knew this is the last time. Watching as I climbed the stairs and the plane swallowed me. She and I could no more change what we hurtled toward than we could change the weather. Finding my seat, unseen, I stared back as she receded. They drop into holes in the earth. Everything you loved and hated, as you will drop. In the moment when all was possible, gone. You are still above earth. The moment when all and nothing is possible, long gone. Terrified of the sea, we cling to the hull. In adolescence, you thought your work, ancient work, to decipher at last human beings' relation to God. Decipher love. To make what was once whole, whole again, or to see why it never should have been thought whole. Earth was a tiny labyrinthine ball orbiting another bigger ball, so bright you can go blind staring at it. When the source of warmth and light withdraws, then terrible winter. When burning and relentless, it draws too close, the narcotically gorgeous, fecund earth withers, as if the sun as if the sun taught us what we will ever know of the source. Now too far, then too close. Blood Island, where you for a time lived. I'll read one more poem from this book and then a couple of new poems. For an unwritten opera. Once you had a secret love. Seeing even his photo, a window is flung open high in the airless edifice that is you. Though everything looks as if it is continuing just as before, it is not. It is continuing in a new way. Sweet lingo, O'Hara and Ashbury teach. That's not how you naturally speak. You tell yourself first that he is not the air you need. Second, that you loathe air. As a boy, you despise the world for replacing God with another addiction, love. Despised yourself. Was there no third thing? But every blue moon, the skeptical, the adamantly disabused, find themselves like you, return to life by a secret, like him in you. Now you understand Janacek at 70, in love with a much younger married woman, chastely writing her. As in Mozart, song remains, no matter how ordinary, how flawed the personae. For us poor mortals, private accommodations, magpie beauty. Now, two poems from there's going to be a section of new poems at the end of the collective. And the majority of the section will be made up of a long poem called The Fourth Hour of the Night, which is going to be in Poetry Magazine next month, May. But there are, I think, 5 lyrics surrounding it. And I'll read 2 of those lyrics. This is actually going to be the last poem in the collective. I had a dream. In the dream, I saw the earth green, fecund, turning. I was dead. I couldn't touch it. But rather than feeling woe or anger at that fact, I got immense pleasure watching it turn and constantly change. Anyway, here's the poem. Visions at 74. The planet turns there without you. Beautiful. Exiled by death, you cannot touch it. Weird joy to watch postulates lived out and discarded. Something crowded inside us, always craving to become something glistening outside us. The relentless planet showing itself the logic of what is buried inside it. To love existence is to love what is indifferent to you. You think, as you watch it turn there, beautiful. A world that can know itself only by world. Soon it must colonize and infect the stars. You are an hypothesis made of flesh. What you will teach the stars is constant rage at the constant prospect of not being. Sometimes when I wake, it's because I hear a knock. Knock, knock, 2 knocks, quite clear. I wake and listen. It's nothing. And one more poem. A poem that has become the title poem for this section of poems. And as mentioned in that marvelous poster that was designed for this event. Half light, half light. That crazy drunken night I maneuvered you out into a field outside of Coachella. I'd never seen a sky so full of stars, as if the dirt of our lives still were sprinkled with glistening white shells from the ancient seabed beneath us that receded long ago. Parallel. We lay in parallel furrows. That suffocated, fearful look on your face. Jim, yesterday I heard your wife on the phone tell me you died almost 9 months ago. Jim, no, we cannot ever. Bitter that we cannot ever have the conversation that in nature and alive we never had. Now, not ever. We've not spoken in years. I thought perhaps at 90 or 100, 2 broken down old men, we wouldn't give a damn in fine speech. When I tell you that all the years we were undergraduates, I was madly in love with you, you say you knew. I say I knew you knew. You say there was no place in nature we could meet. You say this as if you need me to admit something. No place in nature, given our natures. Or is this warning? I say what is happening now is happening only because one of us is dead. You laugh and say, or both of us. Our words will be weirdly jolly. That light I now envy exists only on this page. Thank you.
Let's have another round of applause for Frank, do you want to take questions, or?
Sure, yeah.
Does anybody have any questions about his work,
Or anything.
or anything at all?
I can answer anything.
What hunger for the absolute means, for example?
What was the example?
I said what hunger for the absolute means.
Oh, what hunger for the absolute means. It's a phrase, there's a wonderful book called Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill. And she talks about hunger for the absolute being a central emotion out of which the search for God comes, out of which much aspiration comes. Our life daily is almost never made up of absolutes. There's things that are always partial, always in some ways broken or part of something else. And we crave some absolute, some purity, something unqualified that it's very hard to find. outside the idea of God, or an approach to the ground of things. And I think this is something I find within myself, a desire for this. And also, I think a great deal of the horrible things in the world proceed from the fact that we have this hunger within us. Our world is very much ravaged by people who are absolutely convinced what the absolute is. And of course, the people who seek the absolute never agree on what it is, but they're willing to kill each other and us in order to manifest it. So I think this hunger for the absolute is both good and bad. It's something that is both scary and part of what makes us human.
Anyone else?
There must be another question. Yeah, hi.
Hi. So in the selections that you just read, you seem to use second person quite a bit, and so I was just wondering if you had a reasoning for that, why you didn't choose first person.
Right. Well, discovering that you could use a you, meaning the I, was a tremendously liberating thing for me. I don't think I did it in my first book. I became very conscious of it around the second book. And it's speaking to oneself, but there's a way in which one recognizes that self that has done things as other. There are all sorts of things you can say to yourself when you're talking to you that you can't simply say I, because I so much implies some sort of unified I. Actually, I have a little poem about this pronoun issue in this book, so let me read it. It's short. Anyone from my generation who's gay has to confront the fact that one has survived. And a great many people one cared about, I knew, who were gay didn't survive the AIDS epidemic. And in the context of this poem, I discussed this issue of the you. For the AIDS dead. The plague you have thus far survived. They didn't. Nothing that they did in bed that you didn't. Writing a poem, I cleave to you. You means I, one, you, as well as the you inside you constantly talk to. Without justice or logic, without sense, you survived. They didn't. Nothing that they did in bed that you didn't. That question was so perfect for my reading that poem. It's almost as if I prompted you to ask that question, but I didn't. One more question? Yeah, Mary?
So I was just thinking when you were reading in the title of the real great poster of Half-Life.
Yeah.
It seems to me, since I can't remember the name of the thing, it seems to me a lot of your poems take place in half-life situations.
Yes.
Do you feel, there's sort of the person looking back in the bedroom, the person, even going out into the night, you have the starry light. There's a few daytime poems, but it's
very few.
Very few, we won't go there.
I'm not a morning person.
Yeah, no. But it's interesting, but they're not, there are some night poems, but the half-light I felt was so kind of moving, but it's not so much, do you feel like that half-light moment for you in these poems and I've been thinking about poems from a long time ago, Is it a liminal place? It doesn't seem to, what's interesting about it, I'm just thinking out loud, it doesn't seem like a dream place all the time.
No.
It's really this muted place. Sometimes it's kind of looking past something with, you know, must sound melancholy. But it's interesting. It's an interesting sort of weird lighting, and all of a sudden, sort of when the half-light things are making
Well, I mean, literally, I don't much like sunlight. I think a city looks much more beautiful at night, lit by street lights. And, you know, the ugly things you can't see often. And it becomes a magical place. I don't think of half-light as being a false light.
No, I didn't.
No, I weren't implying it, but I think of it as being a light in which you can see, in fact, true things that sometimes you can't see when the sun is at full blaze. And the night offers often things that you cannot see when you're looking straight at them, full on, in full light. It's also a statement that's saying everything I think of here as partial is tentative, is not stated as the full truth, but the truth as I perceive it. And I acknowledge that there is a limit to that it might only be in half-light.
It's sort of funny, the hunger for the absolute meets half-light.
Right, well, it meets half-light and also meets hatred of the absolute.
Yeah.
And in a way where they can meet is in half-light. And just as in, you know, that little poem about Name the Bed, starts out in half-light with the word half-light. And I think what you see then, or what you experience when you look at it, is on the one hand, someone wanted more from that bed than was found there. And on the other hand, name the bed that's not true of. I mean, that is, there are things that you would not perceive when the bed is neatly made in the daylight. But when it's crumpled up and it's a scene of action and often frustration, you can see something about its nature.
What's your favorite color?
I don't think I have a favorite color.
Is it black?
No, black is too absolute. I'd like to have a uniform that I don't have to ever think about what I'm going to wear today. But I know I like purple a lot, and that's a kind of in between. But I don't know. I don't perceive a favorite color. One more question? No.
Yeah, one more.
Yes.
I was wondering if you think of the themes for your books and if you write the poems according to the themes, or if it happens the other way around. But I found the consistency of the metaphysical in the poems from that collection to be really kind of astounding.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I begin, no, I don't have a single theme, but I look for a theme, and I like that sensation that there is a theme that these poems are coalescing around. And I've also found once I get in, if I really get into, I don't think of it simply as a theme, it's an issue. And Yeats said the thing that I think is the profoundest thing ever said about poetry. He said, out of our argument with others, we make rhetoric, which is the same language designed to persuade. But out of our argument with ourselves, we make poetry. And I think all my poems proceed from an argument within myself. And the argument will revolve around an issue. Sometimes it's an issue it takes me a while to recognize. But I mean, not only does it describe something in the poems that I've written, but it helps me write other poems. Because then I think, well, if I want this book to be about guilt, what do I really have to say about guilt? How can I explore this? Is there a way that guilt is is related to the mind-body problem? Or how is the mind-body problem related to art? And I have gotten poems out of that. So I found it, rather than being limiting, I found it generative. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Frank. So we have a few things for you. I know, but we had to. Okay, so first and foremost, we blew up and then framed this fabulous flyer for you, which I know you love.
I absolutely love it, and I'm thrilled to have it, and I wanted to get a good copy of it. So.
Well, there you go.
And tomorrow I'm meeting with my editor, and I'm going to show it to him. He's going to use it. So, it's fantastic.
A plug for the artist, she's still looking for a job, so.
Well, it's really, she did fantastic.
And also, this is a card for you,
Thank you.
and also some flowers.
Thank you.
They're
So
hydrangeas.
much. Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank you.
thank you so much for coming again. Right now, we're gonna have, yes, we're having a small reception. So just join us in the beer room in the back.